Imagine a world where every agreement is automatically enforced, where the ink on a contract is replaced by lines of code that execute themselves without the need for intermediaries. This is the realm of smart contracts, self-executing agreements written in code that live on a blockchain. But what exactly does that mean? In essence, smart contracts are digital agreements that automatically carry out the terms set within them when predefined conditions are met. Think of them as a vending machine. You insert money and make a selection, and the machine delivers your choice without any human involvement. This automation not only streamlines processes, but also eliminates the ambiguity and potential for disputes that often accompany traditional contracts. In a conventional contract, the enforcement relies heavily on trust in the legal system, which can be slow and prone to interpretation. In contrast, smart contracts maintain immutable records, meaning once they're deployed, their terms cannot be altered. This inherent transparency fosters a level of accountability that traditional contracts often lack. Imagine a governance system where land ownership disputes are resolved not through lengthy court battles but through a few lines of code that instantly verify rightful ownership based on transparent records. The strange consequence is that with smart contracts, the very nature of governance could shift from a reactive model, where laws are enforced after disputes arise, to a proactive one that prevents conflicts before they escalate. Suppose a community decides to implement smart contracts for all property transactions. Each agreement would be recorded on a public ledger, accessible to everyone, ensuring that all parties are aware of ownership and obligations. This could significantly reduce the friction that often leads to territorial disputes, as the information is clear, accessible, and indisputable. Now, let's consider the implications of this shift. If every agreement is enforced automatically, what happens to the roles of legal professionals or even governments? Would they become obsolete, or would they evolve to manage more complex social issues? Who benefits in this new landscape, and who might feel threatened? As we ponder these questions, it becomes evident that the adoption of smart contracts could redefine the power dynamics within societies, potentially leading to a new form of governance that emphasizes transparency and efficiency over traditional hierarchical structures. What if the future of governance could be reshaped entirely by technology, facilitating cooperation rather than conflict? As we delve deeper, we will explore real-world applications of this concept and how they might transform our understanding of territorial ownership and conflict resolution. Imagine a world where the land disputes that have sparked wars and prolonged suffering could be settled not on battlefields, but through lines of code. What would happen if these conflicts were resolved by the simple execution of a smart contract? This is more than just a fanciful idea. It's a growing reality in various corners of the globe. In countries like Georgia, smart contracts are being implemented to streamline land registration, creating a transparent and immutable record of ownership. These digital agreements ensure that once a piece of land is registered, its ownership is clear and verifiable, which reduces the potential for disputes. No longer can claims to land be muddied by competing narratives or corrupt practices. Imagine a farmer in Georgia, empowered by a digital title that is recognized and protected by a smart contract. If a neighboring entity attempts to lay claim to that land, the contract automatically verifies ownership and prevents unauthorized actions. This is not just a theoretical framework. It's an operational model that has already shown promise in reducing conflicts over land. Now, consider another case study in Sweden, where blockchain technology is being used in conjunction with smart contracts to redefine property ownership. In this system, every transaction related to a piece of land is recorded on a decentralized ledger that is accessible to all stakeholders. As a result, the history of ownership, sales, and agreements is transparent. When a dispute arises, parties can consult the ledger to find the truth, effectively removing the ambiguity that often fuels conflicts. The strange consequence is that these smart contracts serve not only as transactional tools, but also as peacekeepers, fostering a climate of trust among landowners. Imagine the implications: a society where ownership disputes are resolved through immediate and indisputable evidence, rather than through drawn-out legal battles that can escalate into violence. What if the principles behind these case studies could be applied more broadly, transforming how nations interact with one another over territorial claims? The reduction in disputes through clear ownership records could usher in an era where countries prioritize dialogue over aggression. By eliminating the gray areas that often lead to misunderstandings and conflicts, Smart contracts could redefine international relations as we know them. The potential for technology to prevent conflict becomes a tangible reality. In a world governed by smart contracts, land ownership could become as unambiguous as a well-written agreement, one that benefits not just individuals, but entire nations. So we must ask ourselves, can technology truly prevent conflict? And if so, how far can it take us in creating a more peaceful world? As we explore these possibilities, we must remain aware of the trade-offs and implications that come with such a fundamental shift in governance. Imagine a world where every nation, every community, has access to transparent, automated agreements that clearly define territorial rights and responsibilities. In such a landscape, the very notion of war as a means to resolve disputes begins to lose its relevance. What if, instead of soldiers marching onto battlefields, disputes over land and resources were settled through lines of code? This is not just a distant dream. It is a possibility that might emerge from the integration of smart contracts into global governance. In this scenario, we can envision automated conflict resolution mechanisms that operate on principles of transparency and mutual understanding. These smart contracts would allow nations to predefine the conditions under which territorial claims are validated or disputed. Imagine a digital agreement that stipulates, for instance, that if two nations claim the same territory, a predefined process kicks in, perhaps involving international arbitration or resource-sharing agreements, triggered automatically without the need for military posturing. This could fundamentally de-escalate potential conflicts before they even begin. The strange consequence is that the very fabric of international relations could shift from one rooted in suspicion and fear to one based on collaboration and shared values. What would happen if historical conflicts, such as the tensions over the borders in the Middle East or the disputes in the South China Sea, had been governed by such transparent agreements? Would they have escalated to the levels we have witnessed, or would the clarity provided by smart contracts have paved the way for dialogue and compromise? In this envisioned future, the decentralized nature of these agreements could foster a sense of community among nations, encouraging them to align their values rather than compete for dominance. The challenge remains: how do we ensure that all parties are genuinely committed to these agreements, and how do we address the potential backlash from traditional nation-states that may feel threatened by this shift? As we ponder these questions, we must recognize that the integration of smart contracts is not a panacea. It raises new dilemmas and requires us to rethink our understanding of sovereignty and governance. Yet, the prospect of a world where conflicts are resolved through mutual consent and automated processes is a tantalizing one. Imagine a future where the ink of treaties is replaced with the code of smart contracts, and nations thrive not through the might of their militaries, but through the strength of their agreements. Could this truly be the path to lasting peace? The implications of such a transformation are profound, suggesting that as we step into this new era, we have the opportunity to redefine what it means to coexist in a shared world, where war is not an option, but a relic of the past. What if the lines on a map were no longer relevant? Imagine a world where borders are not defined by rigid lines of ink, but by the fluidity of shared agreements, governed by smart contracts that operate transparently and autonomously. In such a landscape, the traditional concept of sovereignty, that is, the authority of a state to govern itself, begins to blur and shift. Picture this: nations that once held power through military might and territorial claims now find themselves engaging in cooperative agreements that transcend borders. The strange consequence is that warfare, as we know it, may become obsolete, replaced by a new paradigm of conflict resolution. As we consider this transformation, we must ask ourselves, what would happen if we redefined sovereignty in this way? Would the absence of rigid national boundaries foster peace or create new tensions? To explore this, let's look back at history. Consider the Treaty of Versailles, which ended World War I. The punitive measures imposed on Germany are widely viewed as having sown the seeds for World War II. What if instead, a transparent, smart contract had outlined the terms of peace, enforced by a decentralized network that all parties trusted? The need for military intervention could have diminished, and nations might have cooperated instead of antagonized. This is not merely speculation. It illustrates how historical conflicts could have been avoided with clear, automated agreements that were visible and immutable. Now fast forward to our proposed future. In a world governed by smart contracts, Decentralized governance could allow for emerging alliances based on shared values, values that prioritize collaboration over competition. Instead of nations rallying around flags, people might unite around principles encoded in smart contracts that ensure fairness and equality. Imagine communities across the globe collaborating on environmental issues, trade, or public health, bound not by the political whims of any single leader, but by mutual agreements that are enforced automatically. The implications are profound. In this scenario, the concept of a nation-state, which has historically been the central actor in warfare, begins to shift. Would we still see conflicts erupt over territorial disputes when the underlying agreements are transparent and universally acknowledged? However, the transition to such a system is not without challenges. Traditional nation-states may resist this shift, feeling threatened by the erosion of their power. The backlash could manifest in various ways, from attempts to undermine decentralized governance to invoking nationalism as a rallying cry. As we ponder the future of warfare, it's crucial to recognize that the integration of smart contracts is not a panacea. The trade-offs will be significant. While some may gain greater autonomy and power through decentralized agreements, others could find themselves marginalized in a landscape where traditional power dynamics are upended. The question remains, what happens to identity and loyalty in a world where borders are fluid? Would we see a rise in local identities, or would global citizenship become the norm? As we navigate this complex terrain, we must remain vigilant about the ethical implications of such a transformation. So, let's return to the original question. How would warfare look in a society governed by smart contracts? If conflict resolution shifts from the battlefield to the blockchain, what new forms of diplomacy might emerge? The future may hold a promise of peace, but it also requires us to grapple with the intricate web of relationships that define our world today. The evolution of warfare in this light could become a reflection of our willingness to embrace cooperation over conflict, inviting us to imagine a future where the lines on a map are not barriers, but bridges to understanding and collaboration. Imagine a world where the very fabric of international relations is woven from threads of shared values and automated agreements, a tapestry of cooperation rather than conflict. What if instead of nations amassing arms in preparation for war, they engaged in a new form of diplomacy, one underpinned by smart contracts that operate transparently and autonomously? The future of governance could unfold in ways that challenge our current understanding of power and sovereignty. In this speculative landscape, nations might find themselves not as isolated entities, but as interconnected partners, collaborating to address global challenges. Picture this, a coalition of countries facing a common threat, like climate change or cyber warfare, not only recognizing their shared interests, but also automating their commitments through smart contracts. The strange consequence is that these agreements could facilitate collective action, allowing nations to respond swiftly and effectively, bypassing the often slow machinery of traditional diplomacy. Imagine an agreement that automatically allocates resources for disaster relief based on predefined criteria, executed without bureaucratic delays. This is not just a theoretical exercise, it's a glimpse into how aligned values among smart contract societies could foster unprecedented cooperation. But what happens when we take this premise seriously? Who benefits from such a shift? In this new diplomatic framework, smaller nations, often sidelined in traditional negotiations, could find their voices amplified through decentralized systems that prioritize equitable participation. Conversely, larger nations might feel threatened by the erosion of their traditional power dynamics, challenging their status as global leaders. The implications are profound. If governance is rooted in shared principles, could we see a decrease in the prevalence of armed conflict? The potential exists for a world where disputes are resolved, not through the clashing of armies, but through the execution of code that reflects the will of the people. This shift could redefine the very notion of sovereignty. What if a nation's power was not solely derived from its military might, but from its ability to collaborate and innovate within a network of smart contract societies? As we ponder these possibilities, we must also consider the potential backlash from established nation-states. Would they embrace this transition or resist it fiercely, clinging to traditional notions of control? The trade-offs are significant. While a new era of cooperative conflict resolution could lead to lasting peace, there is a risk that marginalized voices may be drowned out by more powerful players in the decentralized arena. The question remains, can technology truly be a force for good in the realm of international relations? Could a world governed by shared values and automated agreements lead to lasting peace? Imagine the scenarios that could unfold. Perhaps we would see a future where international treaties are no longer lengthy documents filled with legal jargon, but concise, clear agreements that all parties understand and can trust. In this landscape, the emphasis shifts from competition to collaboration, fostering a sense of global citizenship that transcends national borders. As we navigate this speculative future, the promise of smart contract societies invites us to rethink the very foundations of governance and the nature of our collective existence. What if, instead of being at odds, we could harness technology to build a world where cooperation is the norm rather than the exception? The potential is within our grasp, waiting for us to explore and realize its full impact on our shared future.